We bid you welcome. We do not ask what you believe or expect you to think a certain way, but only that you try to live a kindly, helpful life with the dignity proper to a human being. Welcome all who believe that religion is wider than any sect and deeper than any set of opinions. Welcome all who might find in our friendship strength and encouragement for daily living. Good morning and welcome to the Universalist Unitarian Church of Farmington. I am the Reverend Glenn Farley. I'd like to extend a special welcome to any visitors today. After the service today is a special day. We're going to have our annual meeting, and then after the annual meeting, we'll have a coffee hour outside. When indoors, we are observing COVID precautions and wearing masks regardless of your vaccination status. If you have a joy or sorrow you'd like to share, please fill out a blue card and give it to an usher, and it will be read later in the service, and you can also text the number listed at the top of the inside of the order of service. Is there any announcements this morning? Yes.
Hi, I'm Barb Iovan, part of Social Justice, and my announcement today is to remind everyone that the butterfly flies back next week. It's such a great event, and so we welcome again people that have bought tickets for the previous 2 years as well as last year for this year. Just come at the door and you'll be greeted warmly, and doors open at 6:30. It starts at 7, and beer, wine, pop, I think. Beer, wine, lemonade, and snacks are all included. So it's really a great evening. Again, doors open at 6:30, and it starts at 7. One other announcement, too, is that today, another event that's been on hold for a couple years is Bookstock at Laurel Park in Livonia. So, and it runs through next Sunday, and I think that's when books are reduced in price. So just a reminder, it's a great time to pick up some books in Spanish or Spanish English for the students we love at La Casa Guadalupana, who we support. So just a little suggestion there. You can put them in the white bin at the entryway. Thank you. Friday the 20th, next Friday.
Good morning, all. Just a little bit of housekeeping for this morning's congregational meeting. I want to give time for everybody to get set, get the materials they need, take a break, stretch, and help. We can AV can break down the stuff from choir. So following service, no earlier than 11:30, but at least like a 10-15 minute break so that we can get reset. Thank you.
Thank you. Printed in your order of service is our shared affirmation of mission, and I invite you to speak it aloud with me now. We seek answers everywhere, include everyone, and live with compassion. I have some words for the chalice lighting this morning by the Reverend Gretchen Haley. We believe you. Your stories held too long in secret and shame are safe here. You are safe here to grieve, to rage, and reckon and reconcile, return and restore. There is a place here for every piece of yourself, bodies and spirits, voices and breath, broken and beautiful, bitter and still refusing to give up hope in this dimming light. There remains a path for beginning again. Do not hold back your heartbreak or your joy, your vision for the world that is already and also not yet. Let every tender longing of your heart be an offering for this time and for this community, as we are building here already a new way. The will, the courage, the faith to be the leaders, the people, the parents, the friends, the citizens, our world and we need now. The change begins now. Come, let us worship together.
So we'll sing it through twice, and then we'll sing it through again with everybody. Great. As soon as I get there.
12 years ago, during my ministerial formation, I attended an all-day training in New York City in Manhattan at Union Theological Seminary. It was a training on domestic violence prevention for religious leaders. One of the facilitators worked in this field for over 30 years. She told a story from the mid-1980s, her first day on the job at a woman's shelter. Her very first day, she recalls getting screamed at through the phone by a local pastor, furious that the shelter took in a woman and her children, protecting them from their abuser. The pastor was accusing the shelter of tearing apart families. That was her introduction to the relationship between the church and intimate abuse and violence. Soon after that, in her preventative work, they did extensive surveying in communities beset by domestic violence. They literally polled hundreds of people in various communities across New York City, asking, when these types of issues come up, who will you feel most comfortable discussing them with? Consistent across the communities, they would feel most comfortable discussing them with clergy. So her organization began an extensive educational effort to faith communities and religious leaders, and they've been doing that work for decades. Some of my mentors and professors in seminary, Christian women scholars and theologians such as Rebecca Parker and Rita Nakashima Brock, have done extensive theological work on these issues of violence and abuse and theology, and work to reframe or reconceptualize the dominant Christian tradition. Rebecca Parker wrote, "Even the best pastoral care cannot always overcome the impact of a theological tradition that teaches the highest form of love is the willingness to bear violence for the sake of a greater good." The tradition thus defined and interpreted makes it difficult to understand love as something more than denying yourself for the sake of someone else. Religion that sanctifies and exalts patriarchy and male privilege as normative, ideal even, is a key part of the problem of intimate abuse. Intimate abuse is one of the more extreme examples of love as self-denial or self-sacrifice. But whenever I find myself or others thinking about or conceptualizing love as how much you're willing to suffer for, as a measure of love, I'm reminded to take a step back and reevaluate. When the concept of love has been co-opted to sanctify violence and abuse, it must be refuted in the strongest terms. Slowly, the sermon is turning into a common Unitarian Universalist pattern, explaining in intricate detail what we do not believe instead of what we do believe, what we do stand for. I'm determined not to allow that to happen. So if love is certainly not self-denial, what is it? Our reading for today will begin to point the way. It's a poem by Jalal al-Din Rumi, the mystical Persian Muslim poet from the 13th century. Translations of his poems have made him the best-selling poet in America during the last few decades. Rumi writes, "The way of love is not a subtle argument. The door there is devastation. Birds make great sky circles of their freedom. How do they learn that? They fall, and falling, they're given wings." I grew up at the Cedar Lane Unitarian Universalist Church in Bethesda, Maryland. There was a tradition there for many years that when the high school seniors graduated, they participated in a senior service and would share their hopes and aspirations with the entire congregation. As a side note, we'll be having a similar service for our youth here next Sunday, not our graduating seniors, but the youth who were in the coming of age service this past year, program this past year, will speak to us next Sunday. But at my home church at Cedar Lane, the graduating seniors would always receive a gift of Khalil Gibran's book, The Prophet. I understand this was a hugely popular book in the 1960s. It's a collection of sayings and reflections, and one of the more popular ones is on children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. Their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrow may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. On the day of my senior service, when I was 18 years old, I recall having a conversation with my mother when I was given a copy of that book, and we discussed this poem on children. She told me, "You know, Glenn, when I first read that poem, I thought, screw you, Gibran. Who does this man think he is telling me my children don't belong to me?" But over time, I thought about it more, and I decided he was right. You and your brother are children of the world, of the universe, of life's longing for itself. This is a paraphrase, but it accurately reflects the gist of the conversation. My mother was not known for her subtlety or tact. Now, growing up as my mother's child, I can vouch for the fact that my mother did struggle with this. Was I her child or a child of life's longing for itself, a child of the universe? It played out in our interactions quite often, especially when I was a teenager. In the poem, the metaphor of the archer's hand informs us of the different ways of loving. I once read an embodied representation of the different ways of expressing love. You can love with a closed fist. It can feel good to help. It feels good to be needed and wanted. You can grasp tightly and not let go. But Rumi tells us that the door to love is devastation. You can also love with an open fist. But if you express love in an open-handed way, the object of your love can fall away. It's a giving up of control. It opens the door to rejection, to disappointment, to separation, to no longer being needed. And that is a big risk. That is devastating. A gift my mother gave me was that somehow, in her own way, she faced that devastation, which allowed me to grow and to grow up with my own thoughts and my own soul. And that is a gift of love. In my own journey of growing up, somewhere along the line, I got this idea that our purpose here is to love. These experiences I had with my church, with my mother, with that training during seminary, they refined for me what love truly is, what love really looks like. A Pollyanna-ish love is to think, well, if I'm nice to everyone all the time, then I'm loving. But love isn't easy. To love is to be vulnerable, and being vulnerable is scary. In the examples I mentioned with my mother, sometimes love is letting go of those closest to you, those you love the most. And sometimes in issues of abuse or safety, love requires saying no, setting very strict boundaries, and even excluding or separating. All of this takes courage, this letting go, this saying no. And it isn't a one and done, heroic, courageous event. It is an ongoing requirement of continual courage throughout our lifespan. The courage to become who you are. Let's pause for a moment and hear the choir sing "Cross the Wide Missouri." I want to share some excerpts of lives from masters in their respective crafts, people that I admire, as they reflect back on their own childhoods and how they eventually came to it in their life's vocation, what inspired their courage to become. David Whyte is an Anglo-Irish poet and author and lecturer. He gave a lecture entitled Courage and Vulnerability, the Beauty and Human Reluctance. During the discussion, he relates what he thought of the world when he was 13 years old. As a child, whenever he would listen to adults conversing, he would say to himself, "These people are completely and utterly insane. What they're talking about makes absolutely no sense. They have forgotten the priorities of existence." He had a constant experience as a child of adulthood being a form of amnesia and regret, he says. The adults around him, they had forgotten what was important, and they were always regretting this or that. And then suddenly, when he picked up books of poetry by 20th century poets Tom Gunn and then Ted Hughes, and he said it was like a hawk came and picked him up with its talons and took him soaring. There's a possibility of keeping the spirit alive, the soul alive. To him, these adult poets still got it, the priorities of existence. Now, you may or may not have that experience when you read 20th century poetry, but he did. Poetry helped him make sense of the adult world and the world more broadly, and he eventually became a poet and writer and speaker as an adult after a short career as a naturalist. The poet Mary Oliver grew up in an unhappy home in Ohio, a sad, depressed place, a difficult place. She wrote once that she is one of many thousands who had had insufficient childhoods. For solace, for sanity, she spent a lot of time walking around the woods as a young person. She spoke of it in an interview On Being with Krista Tippett. Mary Oliver said, "It was a very bad childhood for everybody, every member of the household, not just myself, I think. And I escaped it barely, with years of trouble. But I did find the entire world in looking for something else. I got saved by poetry. I got saved by the beauty of the world." Mary Oliver, so beloved a poet with her imagery of nature and the natural world. I want to share one of her poems that's relevant to our discussion today. This is her poem, In Blackwater Woods. "Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds. And every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this, the fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go." Sam Keen is the author of over a dozen books in philosophy and religion. One of his more popular ones is Fire in the Belly, On Being a Man. It was published in 1992. One of his lesser-known books he wrote in 1999 entitled Learning to Fly, Trapeze, Reflections on Fear, Trust, and the Joy of Letting Go. In that book, he talks about his childhood in Alabama and Tennessee, of going out in the woods and climbing trees with his brother. He would look for the trees with grapevines hanging on them and try to swing vine to vine between the trees like Tarzan. Then, after that, he would find young, nubile pine trees, climb to the top, and lean out to ride the crest to the ground, hoping their weight wouldn't snap the bowed trunks. He writes, "My brother and I made every effort to break the bonds of the earth and live aloft. We knew we were meant to be airborne." He shares these stories as he's looking back on his life and his childhood to explain why and how he fell in love with flying trapeze when he first tried it at age 61. Do you remember when you were a child what brought you deep joy? What brought you perhaps sanity and balance in a world completely and utterly insane? I guess my thought is, if we can find that childhood deep joy, or what grounded us in childhood, if we can remember that, it can point us along our way to our purpose or vocation, or even just what grounds us today. What our unique gift to share with each other and the world is. Sometimes the remembering can be difficult, and in this, we can support each other here. With that, let us share a moment of stillness and silence together. May it ever be so. Amen. The offering is one of our most significant religious rituals. It is largely symbolic, for most of us choose to pledge to maintain this institution and its vision. But there was a time when churches did not have collections. There was a time when churches were supported by taxes, and a time when all clergy were government employees. Our forebears fought long and hard for the freedom to worship as we please. Our forebears fought long and hard for the right to be an independent conscience of government and society. They fought for the privilege of supporting the institutions of our choice. There is no freedom without responsibility. There is no responsibility without freedom. This morning's offering will now be gratefully received. At this time, I invite anyone who is visiting, if you are comfortable doing so, I invite you to stand and tell us where you're from and how you heard about us. We'd like to meet you. Any guests or visitors today? Hi. Wonderful. Welcome. Janice. Wonderful, thank you. A perfect heart is one that has known love and loss, joy and sorrow. The perfect heart is one that has been shared. As joys and sorrows of our community are shared, please direct your energy, prayers, meditations as a gift of compassion and strength. Any joys and sorrows to share? today. It is time to put out the chalice and end our service. I just want to read the words of the Unitarian poet E.E. Cummings. It takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. May you go in peace and return in about 10 minutes for the annual meeting. Thank you.
This one was worth waiting for. Now I gotta set up. There we go. Okay. Yep, we're good.